Hello guys, welcome to Shanty Shop Mechanic. My name is Patrick, and in this episode I'm going to be delving into these forgotten hedge trimmers and leaf blower. I bought these a number of years ago, put them away and did nothing with them, so hopefully that'll change today. There's three Ryobi models, two being the same hedge trimmers and one being the leaf blower, a Pro Tool or a generic off-brand hedge trimmer, and then the cream of the crop, the Makita. As you can see, I'm missing the fuel cap. When it was a Makita, I probably would have been a little bit more hesitant in giving away free parts off it, but it's not going to be impossible to retain the petrol in it. There's a will, there's a way. As if it was like magic that the Ryobi fuel cap fits it perfectly. It's practically fixing itself. For the more eagle-eyed viewers, you might have seen the boxes on the desk. These are the carb kits that I'm going to be fitting on. There's no real point in me trying them out the way they are. I know that the Ryobis and the generic brands don't really run that well when they're left for years on end. And if I'm getting rid of them, I'd like them to have something new on them too. Without further delay, I'm going to start on the Pro Tool. The spark tester connected to the spark plug. I'm just going to turn it over and see if there is actually a spark happening, because there's no real point in putting the carb on if I can't identify a spark. I'll just turn it over now. Okay, there is spark, thankfully. It's faint, but it's there. Okay, removing the air filter cover now to get to the bolts. It's usually two 8mm bolts that hold on this carb. Air filter is removed. In this case, it's two Phillips bolts, so I'll remove them now. Nice and easy, all just comes off together. With the two bolts off, the carb is disconnected from the engine and it's just in limbo here on the fuel line. The reason why I'm going to the effort to changing the carb and everything really, that these fuel lines are meant to be a lot less stiff. These are just dried out and they're going to perish, and what they do is they shrink around this grommet and they let petrol flow out of this grommet here, so where it goes into the fuel tank. Bag should have everything I need in order to service this. You can see where the throttle is also, so when I apply the throttle you can see it going up and down. You can see the flap in the carb. The lighting is a little bit better, and for some reason it doesn't seem to want to retract all the way. The throttle does feel quite stiff. I'm going to put some oil down there too while I have this carb off. In order to remove the throttle cable, just pull back on this here and you should see the head of the throttle cable come out. You see it there where my middle finger is, and then just be able to slide it out and then it should be fine. I'm going to remove the carb and the fuel lines. In order to do that, I'm just going to get a flathead screwdriver and go in between the tank and this black grommet here, pry it out, and it should all hopefully pull out. Just carefully prying it out. I'm not really concerned about the grommet, it's more about the fuel tank, not damaging that. Okay, almost there. Probably would recommend using a longer screwdriver, gives you a lot more leverage than this thing. Okay, excellent. Make sure to get the fuel filter out. The next thing is to undo this. The throttle cable hooks up, and that's it. She's right out and ready to go in the bin. Do actually go ahead with throwing the carb out. It would be highly recommended to keep the gasket that goes in between the carb and the face of the intake, just in case if the gasket that does come in the packaging isn't the same, which for me it is. Now it can go in the bin. Another thing to make your life a little bit easier is to reference the old carb to the new one in relation to where the fuel lines go. So this is the fuel line that pumps the petrol back into the tank if you prime too much, so it's just a return line. And this is the actual fuel line where the filter goes. Just saves you about 10 minutes of figuring it out, you know, installing it and then realizing that you have it hooked up the wrong way. Push these buckles on. Doesn't take a great deal of force or effort to do this. And then just make sure to match them up the same way. That looks pretty accurate. The next thing while you have the carb in your hand is to see where the fuel mixture screw is. The initial settings are 1.5 turns out, and then as you get the engine to run, then you can adjust it to fine tune it. So I've this all the way in. Don't Don't jam it in there because you'll damage the carb. Just do it until it's snug and then turn it out 1.5 turns. This thing is ready to be installed. Feed the fuel line through into the fuel tank, and now for the grommet, there's a little bit of a lip you can see, and that goes in the inside of the fuel tank and that sits on the outside of the fuel tank. It sandwiches in and creates a seal. Just twist the grommet in and it'll eventually pop into place, or you can get a flathead screwdriver if you're careful. You don't want to puncture this grommet. It's a lot softer, so it will be easier pierced by the screwdriver. Just feed it in slowly. Just twist it around so you can see what's left. You can see what I mean here. So that stays on the outside and then that stays on the inside. That's what creates the seal. There's only one way of really putting on this throttle cable, and you'll see the big hole here, and there's actually a skinny hole here on this side. So what you want to do is put the big hole away from the throttle cable so you can slide the head over, and then it'll slot into place. What you need to do is draw this back and then twist it around, have it facing parallel to the end of the throttle, and then it should slot into place. And don't forget to put your gasket into place. Just walk it down. Time to take the spark plug out, put the new one in, and to give it its best chance of starting over. Oops. You can see there, I'm just going to put it in by hand first, so I don't cross thread it with the impact. You can do this by hand, of course, as well. I'm going to get this thing filled up with petrol, prime it up, and see what happens. In a bid not to do a bad job or be lazy, I just get the air filter here, clean it off of any residue or any debris that's on it, and get a bit of oil, run along it. That's what keeps the dirt out of the engine. The filter just holds the oil, and the oil is what wraps the dirt. So a thin film of oil and just scrunch it up, make sure that it goes to all areas on the sponge, and then it's ready to go back on the machine. She's primed and hopefully ready to pop off now. I have it on choke, the throttle is set to open, and this needs to come off too. That's odd. I have no idea why the blades are engaging. They might be quite rusty. I reason to believe that's probably because a thin film of rust is just wedged in between the blades and they're not able to slide in between each other. I'm going to oil this up and see if there's any more success. Yes, I think my assumption is correct, because you can see in between the blades there's quite a healthy dose of surface rust. It'll definitely be sticking. So if they're all like that, it's not going to have the strength to be able to slide them back and forth. You need to douse them in either oil or WD-40. Important to ensure that you lubricate the blades on these hedge trimmers, especially after running, because the tree sap or the moisture from the plants that you're cutting can actually make the blade stick once that dries. Just douse it in oil or WD-40 after using, and then put your cover back on. A few days, and it's been a bit of a learning curve with this yoke. I gave it a nice little bath of oil and WD-40 and left it for a few days, and it still didn't unfree it. So much so that I had to take this thing apart. This whole blade assembly, had to loosen it up, pry it with a flathead screwdriver to open it up, then soak it. And then, to add insult to injury, it was still seized, and I had to take the gear case off and work this back and forth. And as you can see, there's still quite a soupy mess of rust on that. But nonetheless, it's going now. Next to sharpen these blades, put a new pull cord and get it gone. To sharpen this is quite easy. Just get yourself a file like this or similar and follow the angle in which the blade goes down. Give that 3 or 4 passes and should be good. You should be able to see it clean up quite nicely. In comparison to this one, might need 1 or 2 more passes, and then to repeat that on the other side, but also not to forget the other blade that sits on top of it too. So it's a few minutes to do it, probably about 20, but it'll just make your life so much easier when cutting. Okay, we're at the final stint with this hedge trimmer. Let's just get this recoil off and replace the pull cord. If you've watched any of my other videos, you'll know that I'm terrible luck with pull cords. So I'm going to be a little bit more proactive this time and replace it while the going is still good. Okay, we got Mr. Recoil here. Seems to be working quite well. What I'm going to do is I'm going to stretch this out as far as it can go. What I need to do now is to undo this bolt, and hopefully I can hold into place this bolt here, and then I can shimmy this up or walk this up a little bit, and then I should probably be able to push out the rope once I have this secured into place. Okay, so it's just being slowly disassembled, and as you can see where the knot, or where the end of the pull cord is, and that's held in by a knot. So what I need to do is grab onto this with a needle and those pliers, pull it out a little bit, and then I can cut it, and I need to hold this into place so it doesn't move anywhere, get the new string and feed it in, tie the knot, and then it should be able to retract just like the old one. You want to make sure that when you're doing this with a recoil, that where the knot is as straight as possible going into the hole here. So when you're putting the new string in, it finds the easiest path possible to find that hole into it. And then, because if you leave it out like this, you turn it around, it has to go around a corner. Well, I know it's a circle, but it kind of has to go around a corner, which can be quite impossible. Get something to jam into between here and keep pressing down on it, because if you release this, there's a spring underneath this and it's just going to fly out, and you're going to be spending an hour at least trying to coil up that spring. I'm going to start fishing for the end of the pull cord, and I should be able to pull it through. Not stressful at all. Why are you so difficult? No! I had to jinx myself, didn't I? Just going to march on and get this pull cord measured up and then see what I can do in regards to the spring. And that will be done off camera. About 10 arduous minutes and no feeling left in my thumbs. I have successfully gotten the spool of wire to go back into place. While you've made the mistake like I have, you might as well just grease the inside of here, because it was quite low on grease, and just to clean it out, give it the best chance possible when the new person is using it. I've matched the length of the new string to the old string, and I've also melted each end of it like this. If my lighter can work, even though it's full of gas. What I've done is just gone around it like that. Just melted the edge, and then just blow on it, and then just very quickly just squeeze it to a point so it makes it easier for it to insert and have it done there. And there should be a little slot there for your string, so when you're recoiling it back by hand, a string doesn't get bound up in between that plastic there. We are back in business. Very good. Let's see this thing in action. Okay, not so bad. Okay, there were quite a good few steps with the last hedge trimmer, but at least it's done and dusted now. The next one on the list is this Ryobi. What I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be going through a speed run on these things. I don't really want to be repeating what I did, but if I do come into a snag or I do come into an issue, I'm going to fast forward to that. Trying to get this carb kit on. Interesting use of a filter. The Ryobi requires an 8mm bolt to remove the carb. Oh dear. And it's gone missing. Oh, would you look at that? That's not useful to have it like that. It's meant to be in there. The hell is going on here? Doesn't matter. I'm just going to replace this carb. Remember to take the fuel lines off to remove the throttle. That'll need a flathead screwdriver. Carb removed. And in Ryobi's infinite wisdom, they don't actually have a grommet, so all I do is to shove the fuel line in through the hole here. I made a huge mistake, mainly with the fuel tank. I tried pulling the fuel line out. The fuel line was incredibly stiff, and I actually damaged the fuel tank doing that. Don't ask me, I've never done it before, but I had to throw it into this video to show you that it is possible. I made an oval shape of the hole that the fuel line goes through, all by trying to pull it out as opposed to pushing it back into the tank and then fishing it out. I need to get a new fuel tank for this thing, but it's fine. I'll get it turning and burning, just not in this episode. In order to be able to get it through, you need to cut this at an angle so it can poke in. Should be able to pull these out by my hand. If not by a long nose pliers. Make sure that you remove the fuel filter at the end of this. Okay, maybe not. Come on, out. New carb to be installed. Need to get the gasket. It's the gasket there. I would be in favour of using the old gasket if it's still in one piece. Again, it seemed to have come with the wrong gaskets for whatever reason, so that's why I'm using the old one. Now, silly Patrick, remember to install the throttle cable. As I was saying about the hose, there's two teeny tiny holes here where the fuel lines go into. Having the fuel line like this or flat cut like that isn't going to get it into that hole, so you need to cut it at an angle. So if you have a scissors or a sharp pliers, you should be able to get this done. It should look like that, really. Long nose pliers to get the fuel line out here so I can make that proper cut. Put the fuel filter onto it. Feed that back in. Make sure there's plenty of slack on that fuel line so that it can reach the bottom end of the tank. She's primed, she might be ready, and we'll just see what happens. Doesn't seem to be moving. Okay, excellent. It runs, but like the other one, the blades are rusty. They don't seem to want to move either, so more fun. I don't know which way this thing burns oil, but for whatever reason, it smells horrible. Repeat what I did with the other one and loosen up these bolts so I can separate these two sets of blades here. Those blades are separated from each other, so they should be able to move. I'll need to remove these 5 hex bolts to open up the gearbox. Make sure everything is tip-top magoo in there too. Now, slides right off. Hey, need to get the rubber mallet of justice. Where are you? Clear. Time to use something less drastic, Patrick. Key. Just walk it around each side so you're not pinching it. Okay, it's almost there. And oh boy, that is disgusting. Ugh. I'm going to go off camera for a little bit. Need to diagnose this problem. If you're wondering what this fuzzy thing is for, it's for stopping any dirt or moisture coming into the gearbox, and also it stops the grease from leaving the gearbox too. Hasn't really worked all that well. Quite a lot of surface rust in the gearbox, so that's fun. A little bit of a silly billy. What I did was I kind of got a little bit lazy and I started adjusting the carb a little bit. I gave it a little bit more juice and it just broke free. I'm going to adjust the carb, then I'm going to move on to the next one. You can see how bad that grease is. It's very important to go over these things. Might look good on the outside, but by God, this is not looking good on the inside. Spacer here for the gearbox has a lovely imprint of where it was stationary for a long period of time and has developed a nice little layer of surface rust. Despite having those little sponges, it was still allowing moisture in. Get your little jar and a brush, a little bit of petrol, straight petrol. Don't use the two-stroke because there's oil in that. You want this to evaporate there and dissolve that old crusty grease. Pour a teensy weensy bit into it. All the nooks and crannies. Do this a few times. Get a little cloth, dry up the broken up bits of grease, and then just keep on doing this until it's clean enough, and then just leave it to dry. You do not want to be reapplying new grease in because it's just going to dissolve that as well. And do this in a ventilated area. See, you can see where the grease kind of kicked up in there. Just Bob Ross it. Happy accidents. No mistakes. Well, maybe the mistake would have been buying a Ryobi in the first place, but we won't get into that. As you can see, 10 times better. Still very moist from the petrol, but that'll eventually evaporate in about 10 or 15 minutes. I'm going to get some new grease in it. Some healthy dollops of grease around the gears and a little bit to sandwich in as I put the plate back down. Oh, a little bit of plastic. Make sure not to allow new debris to go in and make this into liquid sandpaper. Wipe off any excess and then just tighten the bolts in. Oh, you silly bear, Paddy. You forgot about the spacer. Good lesson there. Remember to take your time. No point looking at it when you have it all back together. I guess the good thing about the rust is I know exactly which side it was sitting on. So I'm not tightening them all the way down, I'm just getting them into the treads. And walk it down, because you could warp this. Cross applesauce. If you're wondering why I'm using an impact on this, this is actually incredibly weak, so it's quite useful for jobs like this that do not require a whole lot of torque. What I found on my time off is that it was running far too rich and I wasn't able to process the amount of petrol going into it. So I dialed in the air mixer screws all the way in and started it. Worked my way to getting it to run. I will show you the final product. Additional piece of information: when it is idling or you're not on the throttle, these blades should not be moving, so that means that the clutch isn't engaging, so you're not constantly wearing it. Say stop and it's still running, you're good. when I said this? These are the carb kits that I'm going to be fitting on. The point of me trying them out the way they are, I know that the Ryobis and the generic brands don't really run that well when they're left for years on end. If I'm getting rid of them, I'd like them to have something new on them too. Yeah, I may have lied. I may have forgotten to buy the carb for the leaf blower, and I'll just put a clip in here as to why I mightn't have bought the carb for the Makita. It's €200. Let's see if it can run. Tank of fuel, a new spark plug in it. Let's just give it a whack. Got to prime it first. This is a really good case of the fuel lines drying up and shrinking. You can see the petrol has actually gone past the gap in between where the fuel and the fuel tank is. Much like the Makita, I put a new spark plug in and I filled up the tank. So I'm just going to keep on cranking. It should be able to pop off, hopefully. Pour a little petrol down the car. Definitely wanted a lot easier than I thought it was going to be. Oh boy, seems to have a bit of fuel pouring out but as I'm priming it. Definitely going to have to see what I can do with that. Again, this is a good lesson in showing you that despite putting new parts in it, you're better off just getting a new carb for these machines, because the thing hasn't run in at least 5 years. I'm not going to go any further with the Makita or the hedge trimmer. The Makita needs a new carb and it just seems to be way out of price for something like that. Tried seeing if I could get a cheaper one in the weeks ago, but couldn't, unfortunately. To anybody who was wondering, well Patrick, why not just use the diaphragm in the new carb that you have and put it into the old carb and see how that works? Unfortunately, that's not going to be able to work because they're two complete different designs altogether. One defining difference is that this plate here with the diaphragm is much larger than this plate here with the diaphragm behind it. So in real terms, I'm just going to have to get a new carb, which is fine. I'm happy that that thing actually does over and runs, and I'm going to order it and fix it in my own time. Good understanding as to why it's important parts on these machines, especially if they've been sitting for a long period of time. Ethanol is a killer of these things, and it's better off getting a new one, sticking it on, and making your life a lot easier. If you liked what I did, leave us a like or a comment. More than happy to know how I can improve, or if you saw something I did something wrong, I'm more than happy to get feedback on that also. Thank you. Petrol will flow out of this grommet here, so where it goes into the fuel tank.